Hurricane Helen has come through the United States and it's had a lot of damage. Not only property damage, but it's taken 52 lives in the U.S., not just in Florida, but in Georgia, North Carolina, and other places. And it's caused flash flooding in a lot of those places. Homes were floating around. It's not good. And it doesn't look like it's going to get better with storms. And I had a question from an audience member saying, hey, Andrew, can you start talking about how climate change is affecting these hurricanes? And we're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're not talking about something that's fun to talk about, in my opinion. Hurricane Helen just went through the Florida, Georgia, North Carolinas, and other places, taking 52 lives, causing so much damage, and we need to talk about it. We need to talk about these storms. And this one was interesting in a lot of different ways, in that it was a lot bigger, larger in space. When you look at the radius and the diameter of this storm, it really increased rapidly from a Hurricane 1, Category 1, to a Hurricane 4. We're going to talk about these categories, and we're going to talk about what scientists are now thinking in terms of maybe adding another category. So we're going to talk about that today, but we're going to talk about why, climate change is actually helping these storms become more intense and more frequent, and even a lot more flooding, a lot more rain is being had in these in these hurricanes, and that's a danger to a lot of places. So we're gonna talk about that a number of times, and we're also going to talk about ways that people can get better access. Ways that past storms may have had an influence on the decision of how people or when people will evacuate, if they will evacuate. And we're gonna talk about that as well. So lots to get into. Before we do that, though, I just want to remind people, if you want to know more about what's happening in the ocean, you can get access to our newsletter. If you go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter, you can get access to 3 articles a day, Monday to Friday. You can also get access to our latest videos, our latest podcasts, because we're doing video podcasts now, or I'm doing video podcasts now. You can also get access to job openings and things like that around the world. So all you have to go is just click on the link in the show notes, or go to speakupforblue.com. That's speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Just all one word, newsletter. And we can get into it. We can find out more about this information. There's a lot of times we get, I just accumulate all these stories that I see that I find interesting, that I think you would be interested in as well. And I think this is what we do, right? We provide a resource of where you can get information on the ocean. So that's what we do. So speakupforblue.com/newsletter is where you would go for that. Sign up for free. I don't charge anything, and I never share your email with anybody else. But anyway, let's get into the episode. This is not a fun episode to talk about. Like I said, people lost their lives. People lost their homes. Insurance is really difficult to come by, especially when it comes to flash flooding or any kind of hurricanes, especially in Florida. I watched a lot of videos that were covering it. A lot of people were live streaming during the time. A lot more people didn't evacuate, and that's a scary thought. And I think a lot of it was because it started off as a Category 1. It hit the Yucatan Peninsula, so in Mexico, and it was like a Category 3. And once it goes over land a little bit, it kind of dissipates, and it went down to a Category 1. But it rapidly increased. And the size, the sheer size of the hurricane, not the intensity, but the size in terms of how the hurricane clouds, how much area it covered, was a lot bigger, probably one of the biggest ones we've seen in a long time. And you can see there were videos of people being rescued on sailboats and people being rescued from flooding, but even before the hurricane came in. And that's obviously that's a danger. But I went from a category 1 to a category 4, and I want to just talk a little bit about the category. So the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale is what categorizes these hurricanes. So it's categories right now currently 1 to 5. And it basically goes by wind. So category 1 is a 74 to 95 mile an hour winds. Category 2 is 96 to 110 miles an hour. A hurricane category 3, which is a major hurricane, is considered the beginning of the major hurricanes, is 111 to 129 miles an hour winds. Category 4, which was what Hurricane Helen was, it was 130 to 156 mile per hour winds. We're standing against some big winds here. And Category 5, which Hurricane Beryl was earlier this summer, was 157 mile an hour winds or higher. Now, the types of damage for Category 1, if you just think about that, it's very dangerous winds will produce some damage. Well-constructed frame homes could have damage to roofs, shingles, vinyl siding, and gutters. Large branches of trees will snap, and shallow-rooted trees will be toppled. Extensive damage to power lines and poles likely will result in power outages that could last a few to several days. So that's just a category 1. I'm not going to read all of them because I'll put a link to in the show notes of where you can get access to this. This is on the NOAA website. But a major hurricane category 3 is devastating damage will occur. Well-built framed homes may incur major damage or removal of roof, decking, and gable ends. I'm not sure what gable ends are, but many of your trees will be snapped or uprooted, blocking numerous roads. Electricity and water will be unavailable for several days to weeks after the storm passes. I was involved in a Hurricane 3 when I lived in Halifax back in 2003-2004. It was Hurricane 1. It rapidly intensified. We thought it was going to be a tropical storm. It ended up being a category 3. Those winds were no joke. We were lucky in terms of where my wife and I were living, but the downtown areas where there was lots of huge trees that were upended disabled the city for like 3 weeks in a state of emergency, and that is obviously not good. Category 4, which is Hurricane Helen, it has catastrophic damage will occur. Well-built framed houses can sustain severe damage with loss of most of the roof structure and or some exterior walls. Most trees will be snapped or uprooted and power poles downed. Fallen trees and power poles will isolate residential areas. Power outages will last weeks to possibly months. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks or months. Now, imagine this. It's being announced that you're in this area where it's first going to make landfall. I think the Tampa Bay area and the panhandle of Florida. And they're saying, hey, you know what? Earlier in the day, it's a category 1. You might want to think about evacuating, but because the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, is so warm that this could rapidly increase into something like category 2, 3, or 4. It ended up being 4. But a day is not a lot of time to get a lot of people out of a city or a lot of people out of the area. It's not just Tampa Bay. You got surrounding areas. We knew the storm surge was going to be heavy. And storm surge essentially is what water comes to the land from a storm, right? Surging water that comes through, storm surge. They were predicting it's going to be about 8 feet high. That's above most people's height, right? It'd be I would say everybody's height. It's safe to say, unless you're a basketball player and you're 8 feet, that doesn't exist as far as I know. But so that's up above most houses, first floor houses. So that could be very dangerous in terms of flooding roads. You can't get out if you can't leave. There were videos that I saw of older people who were saying, look, I just don't have the means to leave. I'm going to ride it out. There was another gentleman who made CNN. He was, during the storm, he was actually live streaming from his house in a kayak. And he was on the kayak in probably about 5 or 6 feet of water, it looked like. And he was live streaming. He was fine because but he basically lost everything in his home. I think he tried to put stuff in storage. I don't know the full story on this, but he was just sitting on a kayak throughout the whole time. But that water could have gone higher, right? We don't know exactly what that was going to do depending on that surge. And when you have a surge, we have water coming in rapidly, and it could have a current to it. And that could be dangerous if you're out of the house or you're not. Even on boats. Boats were being flown all over the place. When the next day, you saw boats all over the land, right? These are some 20, 30 footers, 40 footers that were just everywhere because the waves were coming in so high, the storm surge was coming in so high. The winds were crazy. It was, a lot of, like, just as I read for the Category 4 hurricanes, that catastrophic damage to houses, homes are actually floating away, right? And if it's not properly framed homes, or like not, what do they call it? Well built framed homes, your home has had a risk of just floating away. That's dangerous in and of itself. And you don't want to see that happen to anybody. The guy in the kayak was saying to CNN, he doesn't have insurance on his home. He says we'll have to start over, and we're just going to have to continue to do this. And this is why I tell people, I'm like, you may not want to live in Florida. You may not want to live in Florida. A lot of people still say, hey, I want to go to Florida because it's so nice. There are some times you may not want to live there full year round or own property, because you may not get insurance for flooding. And it's not necessarily just these major hurricanes. There's an article in the Hill, and I'll put that link in the show notes in the description. They start talking about how, because the Gulf of Mexico and the ocean is getting hotter, then that means the clouds are holding more water, because there's more evaporation of water goes into the clouds, and the clouds are holding, so these hurricane clouds are holding more water. It doesn't matter if it's a hurricane 1, 4, or 5. It matters how much water this is holding. There's more water that's coming down, and that means more flooding. When you add that to the storm surge, you add that to sea level rise, there are a lot of vulnerable areas along those coastlines, and maybe even inland more, because they're not ready for this type of rain, the amount of rain that we're willing to have. The infrastructure was not built that way. And so even if you have a Category 1, people didn't leave when it was a Category 4 because they couldn't, because they thought it was a Category 1 or 2 when it first started to come. They think, hey, you know what? I can survive a Category 1. Well, one, you have the risk of it increasing because of rapidly increasing, because it's getting hotter and hotter in the ocean, more evaporation's coming. Apparently, this is how the winds increase, is when it gets hotter and hotter. And so that energy transfer from the ocean to the clouds gets faster. And so that means it increases not only the size of the storm, but it increases the wind speeds. Hence why we had such a rapidly increasing Category 1 to 4. It increased that wind speed super, super fast. So you have that risk of it actually increasing as it comes closer to land. But then you also have the risk of just the flooding that comes. Even if it's a Category 1, you risk people saying, hey, you know what? It's only a Category 1. I live in Florida. I've lived like my entire life here, and I've gone through hurricanes. And there have been some where we've evacuated, but the Category 1s, that's just like a big storm. And you kind of get that toughness to it, because you're like, yeah, we got some damage, maybe a couple broken windows. We'll put the protectors on the windows, and we'll make sure we reinforce some sandbags and things like that to make sure the water doesn't come in, but we'll be fine. But then you get more water than expected. That's dangerous, right? That's dangerous to your infrastructure that's not used to that much water, right? At that amount of time. Case in point, Burlington, Ontario, where I live. We had the remnants of Hurricane Beryl. It came right up the Midwest, and it took a little right turn. It came right into Ontario, and we had massively rapid rains. We had squalls. It was like, rain squalls, which we don't normally have. We were in squall warnings for a long time. And not only did we get so much water, we had so much water that a lot of the infrastructure couldn't hold. People were flooded out of their homes, in their basements, even in their first level. So not only their basements filled up all the way, but their first level filled up about 5 or 6 feet in certain areas. That infrastructure gets tested during these storms. You just can't continue to have this. That infrastructure is going to have to change. We're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to put more money in the system and really start to look at our politicians to make sure that they are protecting us for that adaptation. Because until we do something to reduce climate change, which we're not doing fast enough, we are going to have these storms. They are going to increase in intensity. They are going to increase in number. There are 2 more storms apparently right behind Hurricane Helen. And the ocean hasn't really cooled down from these storms. So it's just going to get hotter and hotter. And we're just going to find we're late September up here in Ontario, and it's 23 degrees Celsius. That's really hot for this time of year. We are not used to seeing this on a regular basis. We barely had a winter last year. I don't know what this winter is going to be like, if we're going to get more snow, less snow, cold, or even just mild temperatures as we did before. It's a lot of it's up in the air. And the thing is, it's going to, no matter what, it's going to test our infrastructure. Not only in Ontario, but across the Midwest and across the United States, across Canada. down into the southern United States, especially where they get these hurricanes, there's going to be more and more damage, and people are not necessarily leaving their homes. There were a lot of videos of people staying on boats and things like that, and that boat's going to get capsized at one point. At one point before the hurricane even came in during the day, there was a rescue for an emergency that a man and his dog were in the actual water. They had to abandon their sailboat because they're in these massive waves, and their boat was basically just couldn't go anywhere. It was just stuck. It was isolated, and they just couldn't move, and they were afraid. They couldn't get they couldn't get to shore, and they had to, there's harrowing videos of these rescuers, saving the person and the dog. And to be honest, like, what are they doing out there in the first place? I don't know how they got out there, or if they did that on purpose, but that's a danger, right? I'm a dog lover. Nobody wants to see a dog die. Nobody wants to see their owner die either. They put themselves at risk just by being out there. Whether it was on purpose or not, I don't know, so I don't want to make assumptions. But that's taking resources away to save those people, because they have to save that person, but also, that's taking time away from going elsewhere and saving anybody else, right? So things move fast. And case in point, there was a video on Fox News. The guy was on live, the reporter. There was water behind him. Classic shot in a hurricane. There was a car that was almost submerged. You can almost just see the top of the window and the roof. And then you hear someone saying, "Help me, help me, help me." And the reporter said, "We've called 911. Should be here any minute." Told the reporter that he was talking to, the anchor that he was talking to, that they've called 911. But then he finally just said, "You know what? I got to do something." And he hurriedly walked into the water. You don't know what the current is like. Walked into the water, got the woman out, carried the woman all the way to safety, thank God, and then went back and did his reporting. Emergency services can't get everywhere all the time. And by staying in those areas, which is risky, you want to have a service or something that can actually try and predict these things faster, that people can tune into. It's going to be extremely important in the future when you have rapidly growing hurricanes. You have more water in these hurricanes, so more flooding available in these hurricanes, lack of infrastructure, right? And then lack of action. Florida has a governor who's not taking any action against climate change and has removed the word climate change from all of their policies. They've gone in the opposite direction, and the people are paying for it. The people are paying for it. The people who vote them in are paying for it, but also the people who didn't vote for them, they're paying for it as well. And Florida is predicted by the IPCC to go underwater, half of it to go underwater at some point in the future, whether it's 2050 or not. And people aren't believing it. But the IPCC was right when they said, hey, clouds are going to hold more water. It's science, folks. Like, this is what's happening. And we're fighting against, governors and politicians who are denying this. They're getting paid by fossil fuel companies and super PACs that are funded by these fossil fuel companies to say, hey, you know what? There's nothing we can really do. But people are losing their lives. People are losing their homes, their livelihoods. It's going to take a long time to recover from this. And the amount of money that has to go into the recovery and cleanup of this mess, it's insane. It's an insane amount. And I'm working on a story now to look at the actual coverages of the amount of money that it takes to do this. But this is insane to see this on this is going to be regular happenings from now on, these intensified storms, right? And whether they're category 1 or category 4, you're still going to get the same amount of rain, right? And so that's the concern. And with climate change continuing to affect and influence our weather systems, we are going to see these storms continue to happen. And that is scary in itself, right? But I don't want you to think that we're done for this is going to be it. There is hope. There is optimism. There are people out there. There are politicians out there who want to do something about climate change. It's a matter of, can we vote them in? At some point, the work for climate adaptation, the work for reducing the emissions that will affect climate change will come into play, because it's going to affect our economy. I know politicians normally focus more on economy versus the environment, so we have to fund to maintain the economy, but that means a lot of times that we don't fund environmental practices. At some point, those two are going to come together, and the environment's going to affect the economy, as it's doing in Florida, as it did in Georgia, as it did in North Carolina. Right? By these major floods, it takes money to clean this stuff up. It takes money to adapt. And eventually that money is going to affect our economy. It could be already. That's the story I'm working on. So hopefully I'll be able to have something for you soon. But this is a huge, huge problem. And it's not something that we need to, turn a blind eye to. So sorry for this Monday episode being a little bit pessimistic, but sometimes we have to talk about these things. And the hope that I have is that we can actually take care of this. We can actually help the people in Florida, help the people in Georgia, help people in North Carolina and elsewhere, so that we don't have to go through this in the future. All we have to do is just reduce emissions. Just reduce emissions. As complex as it is, it's not difficult to do. We just need to have the people in power to actually do that. And that's up to us to vote. There are major elections coming up in the US, and there's going to be some major elections coming up in Canada. And it's up to us here in North America to help, make sure these politicians get into power. So ask people about their climate change policies if they come around to your door. They should be answering. If they don't have an answer, they don't have a plan, they should not be in power. They should not get your vote, in my opinion. For this audience, climate change is a big deal. And I think, we need to hold our politicians accountable for that. We need to act faster, because we're not only seeing these problems happen, and now it's starting to get regular occurrence, and we can't get used to this. There's just too much money involved. There's the livelihoods of people's lives involved, and we just don't want to see this happen again. So let's get on it. Let's get out and vote. Register to vote if you're able to register to vote, and vote wherever you can and however you can. All right, only once, of course, but vote. That's it for today's episode. If you have any questions or comments on this episode, or if you've been in the areas or you know of any, crowdfunding ways to help some people out, please let me know. I'll post them. I'll add them to the list in our show notes. But let me know. You can get a hold of me just by commenting on the Spotify video or audio, however you're listening to this, or you can go to YouTube where you can see the video of me talking about this stuff. And of course, you can just hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. DM me, feel free to do so, because this is the starting of a conversation and I want to hear your opinions on this. Let me know what you think. And I want to thank Nicole for suggesting this episode. Thank you so much. It was great to get your email and your interaction. If you have a suggestion or a comment, feel free to get a hold of me. I just told you how. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.